As a pharmacist, I mean, how, and you've been doing this for a while. You mentioned it's been 3 generations. How has the world of pharmacy changed from, say, when you first went in to maybe perhaps today? What kind of changes have you seen?
Well, lots of the drugs we have these now, when I first qualified 35 years ago, most of the common drugs, there were no statins, right? Many of the anti-diabetics, antihypertensive, the vast overwhelming majority of the drugs that we use today and accept as the norm didn't exist. So we've seen this incredible flowering of the pharmaceutical industry, which is great, isn't it? If we could say that we're seeing an equivalent flowering of life expectancy and well-being, that'd be great. But what I've seen is, although it's worse in the States, we're very much on the same journey. If you look at the markers of healthy metabolism, only 1 in, I think, 8 adults in the States you can regard as truly metabolically healthy. In other words, they've got none of the markers of metabolic syndrome. And I think the States is one of the highest consumers in the world of ultra-processed food. And there's a clear correlation between ultra-processed food and not just physical illness, but poor mental health as well. Of course, we Brits kind of ape everything our American cousins do. So we're kind of on the same journey with you, but a bit farther behind. So in essence, I've seen a doubling and a redoubling, a re-redoubling of the drugs bill. And I've watched cancer rates, dementia rates, cancer rates, diabetes rates, doubling and redoubling at the same time. But don't knock it, it's a living.
Yeah, no, it's certainly it can be a good living, and there's a lot of people that do quite well in that, and they're happy to kind of continue the status quo because it's quite easy.
Yeah.
Particularly with statins, and you know more than I do, but I think statins came in right around the late '80s, maybe around 1990 or something like that. And prior to that, they had cholesterol lowering drugs as well that have been tried unsuccessfully to have any impact on cardiovascular outcomes. It was like, you could lower cholesterol, but it didn't make a damn difference. And the statins, and I know people talk about pleiotropic effects, or maybe it's an anti-inflammatory effect. But do you remember how that, because I remember when I was first in medical school, I graduated from college in '89, and I remember these new drugs come, family physicians saying this should be put in the water. We should put statins in the water. Everybody needs to be on it because, let's too high. Why saying as a pharmacist that your friend who is worried about his cholesterol should not be on a statin? What are your concerns around that?
Well, I've also re-explored the evidence behind the statins. And I'm not a cultist, right? So let me be very clear. There certainly are people who probably should be on a statin and will benefit. But there are a number of problems. Principal among these is the principle of science and contestability. So the way science works is I do an experiment, I describe in detail the scientific method, and I put up all the statistics that demonstrate the outcomes that I have, from which I'm drawing my conclusions. And you, Shawn, can look at everything I've put out there, reproduce it, and either prove that I have a basis and a legitimacy for what I'm saying or not. Now, historically, and this has got somewhat better, but historically, drug trials were conducted by pharma companies. And it's literally they were marking their own homework. And the result of that was that only the trials that showed the outcome that the drug companies wanted were ever published. And a group of physicians and pharmacists got together, and I can point you to a fantastic TED talk by Ben Goldacre, actually. Perhaps you put that in the show notes. Ben does a fantastic talk explaining bad science and how pharma companies for profit have perverted science. All the evidence around statins is held by a research group in Oxford, and they have sole control of the outcomes. So researchers can't access it, and they won't allow it on the grounds of confidentiality. This is fundamentally anti-science. And in the last 10 years, there's been a growing insistence that all the trials be published, both the positive ones and the negative ones. And what's really interesting, and there's not been a single published trial in the last 10 years since there was much more openness that shows a positive outcome from statins. That's number one. Even if you take the evidence that there is around the published data and you take it unskeptically and look at it, and we can come to the pleiotropic actions if you want, but here's the published evidence. If you've had, and there's a fantastic website I recommend everyone can look at, thennt.com, which again we'll show in the show notes. And the principle here is you balance the numbers needed to treat against the numbers that needed to harm. And medicine is always about that, right? You make a decision, at what point do I intervene? And how confident can I be that whatever I'm doing is doing more good than harm? And if you look at thennt.com and look at statins, the vast majority of people, it will do them more harm than good. And that's based on the published evidence. What about if you took into account all the unpublished evidence, which has made me a bit of a skeptic around statins and a lot of the other medications that we all rely upon. But it also made me realize that actually, if you get your lifestyle right and you understand the fundamental disease processes at the metabolic, at the cellular and subcellular level, driven by our lifestyle, you don't need the drugs in the first place. So let's deal with the root cause rather than dealing with the symptoms.
Yeah, I've often said no one is suffering from a deficiency of a pharmaceutical drug, with rare exception. You might look at a type 1 diabetic or something like that. But I mean,
absolutely,
for the most part, none of us have metformin deficiencies or statin deficiencies.
Exactly, they don't exist.
And I find it, and I've mentioned this. I know Marsh Angle, who is the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, wrote a book a few years ago, similar, saying that, look, these companies hide their data. It's not open for public record. Even the peer reviewers don't have access to it, which is just, it's insane to think that that was being done and still considered, trust the science or evidence-based, when the evidence is, as you mentioned, it's been tailored. It's been, we're only going to show our good results, and that's clearly not in the best interest for patients, I would say. So how do you, again, you're in a career where, this is what pharmacists do, that dispense drugs. How does that, how do you align ethically with that? How do you go to bed at night?
So there are a couple of things. In the UK, pharmacy tends to have a broader and rather more clinical role than as much as it does in the States. So within our contract, there's lots of public health services. So we do medicines use review, help people get the medicine, their medication. And one of the things I'm proudest of was I helped create something called Healthy Living Pharmacy. So the assumption, well, first of all, pharmacists, because we are very highly trained in clinical trials and the use of drugs, most pharmacists both worldwide are very cautious about the use of drugs. And increasingly in the UK in GP practices, they'll have a practice pharmacist, and the pharmacist will be the one responsible for all the drug monitoring, drug optimization, and something we call deprescribing, which is using fewer and fewer drugs to get an outcome. Hence why I call myself the pharmacist that gave up drugs. Now, let me be very clear. Drugs can be life-saving. They're really important. And I'm not encouraging people to unilaterally stop their medication. That would be utterly irresponsible. My issue is the balance here of over-reliance of drugs and the complete lack of understanding of the lifestyle causes. And I want to see my profession remodeled, as I'd like to see your profession remodeled, because we're all paid on the basis of perverse incentives. We kind of do what we're paid to do, and we work within the system, change the system. I would like to see all health professionals educated in the root causes of illness. I'd like to see all health professionals aware that 100 plus years ago, most of the I now call the man-made diseases, so dementia, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and cancer are basically man-made diseases that essentially didn't exist 100 to 120 years ago. If we understood that and we learned the history and we were taught more of the cell metabolism and we were paid in a different way, and that's something that could absolutely happen, you'd see a mushrooming of public health and education, and you'd save so much on the drugs bill and all the long-term consequences. We'd have affordable healthcare worldwide. So it's about how people are paid, and it's the whole precept that's wrong. Health systems need to be rethought.